there. I'm here to model a Think Aloud strategy for you today with a reading on pandemics. I have this page that is from a book called Hurricanes, Tsunamis, and Other Natural Disasters by Andrew Langley that seems a very fitting read for this quarantine situation. Think Aloud is a favorite strategy of mine because it's so versatile. It's easily adapted to any situation and demonstrates the thought process of proficient readers. The Think Aloud strategy probably predates formal education and even a writing system, but I give credit to Daniels and Zemmelman, who state, Think Alouds help students to really see how active their thinking needs to be for real understanding to develop. Think Alouds involve reading aloud the text and then talking through your own process with a special emphasis on proficient reader skills such as connecting, questioning, visualizing, predicting, inferring, and other behaviors that are needed for real understanding or deep learning to occur. One way to make sure you understand the scope of this strategy is to consider what can count as text. Pictures, art can count, poetry, websites, math problems, rules for sports, any kind of directions can all be used to think aloud. So, my process begins with a check of the text copyright. This book was published in 2006, and a look at the pictures. The flea and rat, I predict, are transporters based on previous knowledge. The mask caption tells us that it was a marker for burial sites of Black Death victims in France. The picture of the hospital beds is from the 1918 influenza epidemic. That one may have led to the first misinformation I read about our current pandemic. When I first started reading the news, there were reports of young and healthy victims without pre-existing conditions being impacted. I was relieved to learn that that was an unfounded news article. The last picture could warrant a Think Aloud all of its own, so I'll just say that the beak mask in the lower right corner of the page is quite familiar, but I didn't know the beak was filled with herbs. Probably not effective in warding off disease, but a nice smell option for masks. I may put a vanilla bean in mine later today. As you may or may not notice, a top left start happens, even for pictures and graphs quite often. Our top left page title is Pandemic. Pan was the god of the wild, but the prefix tends to mean all. Demos is Greek for of the people, so that confirms my understanding of the word. It's called a pandemic if it travels over the known world. I'm going to read the first paragraph here, and you can follow along. I'll pause after each paragraph to model my Think Aloud process. In October 1347, a fleet of ships arrived at Messina in Sicily, Italy. On board, everyone was dying or already dead. Dark blotches covered the victim's skin. Their bodies were swollen and their tongues were black. Although the sick were prevented from leaving the ships, no one could stop the rats, which were infested with fleas that carried the mystery infection from scurrying ashore. Soon the people of Messina had the same symptoms as the infected sailors. Well, most of us are visualizing this one, whether we want to or not, with the black tongues and bloated bodies. And I wonder where the ship was returning from when it arrived in Italy. That'd be my first question here. Poor Italy. They were hit hard this time, too. The Black Death. This was the beginning of the Black Death, one of the first great pandemics or worldwide epidemics. The disease had been carried along trade routes from China through Russia and the Middle East, and then across the Mediterranean. From Messina, it spread rapidly through Italy, then raced across Germany, Spain, and France, reaching England in the summer of 1348. Within 4 years, 23 million people had died, around 1/3 of Europe's population. this paragraph confirms my initial word breakdown for pandemic, and it answers my question. It makes me wonder, if a third of Europeans died, then what of other populations? Which, from a critical literacy focus, makes me ask why our text reports only on one population for a pandemic, when the qualifier for the word is that it spreads worldwide. The numbers mean the most to me when presented this way, because it helps us to empathize and realize the scope when you consider one of every 3 people. A package of diseases. The Black Death consisted of 3 diseases caused by a bacterium called Yersinia pestis. The bubonic plague, which killed up to 75% of its victims, the septicemic plague, which killed more than 90%, and those 2 were transmitted by fleas. Anyone who caught pneumonic plague, the 3rd disease, was almost certain to die. Pneumonic plague was spread through droplets of saliva when individuals carrying the bacteria coughed and infected other people. Well, I didn't know that the bubonic plague had 2 deadlier versions called septicemic and pneumonic, but I can connect with recognizing both those prefixes as medical conditions relating to infection, and the pneumonic is probably infecting the lungs. The first 2 were not spread by coughing, but the 3rd spread by plague victims spreading droplets when they coughed. That's why the CDC is recommending that we wear masks during this pandemic. A clear distinction is the Black Death was bacterial, all 3 forms, while our current pandemic is caused by a virus. Return of the plague. The Black Death faded away in 1351, but other plague epidemics have broken out since. In 1665, a plague killed 100,000 people in London, England. In 1894, there was a major outbreak in China that spread as far as India and the US, killing at least 10 million people in total. Despite modern medicines, up to 3,000 cases of plague are still recorded across the world each year. I'm noticing a pattern with these diseases starting in China, and wonder why that is, and how they traced it, especially back then. I love how in modern times our communication happens so fast that I was getting advice from Italians on the mend before it truly even hit us here in the United States. I infer that it is our advanced medicine and communication systems that might be the reasons our numbers are unlikely to reach these horrifying numbers. Hopefully, we know how to flatten the curve, and if we work together, we should be able to do that. Our last paragraph starts a modern pandemic. This is the one I've learned a bit more about because of the misinformation mentioned earlier. I already know that it was influenza-based, making it a virus, like the one now. One of the deadliest pandemics in history began at the end of World War I in 1918, when a new and deadly strain of influenza appeared. Unlike more common strains of influenza, which usually strike the elderly and newborns, the 1918 flu epidemic targeted the young and healthy, as well as more vulnerable people. Passed from person to person, it swept across the world, and between 25 and 50 million people died. Began at the end of World War I. Yet by the end of World War II, there was not a similar spread, which makes me wonder about the Cold War's impact on pandemics. We think of the negatives of that time period when we were stockpiling nuclear arms in the same way the Brits are wiping out the tea aisle and Americans are apparently wiping up with toilet paper. We've become a much smaller world in the years since, in part because of this wonderful thing we have called the internet, and just more communication and travel has happened. So that's definitely changed things significantly. So that's my model of a Think Aloud. It includes connections, questions, inference, and other strategies that happen automatically for proficient readers. A few follow-up activities, if you share this, could be to ask students what they're looking forward to when quarantine ends. A more academic task might be to write the paragraph that could be added to this page for our current pandemic. For math, you could include the numbers predicted and percentages to put it in perspective. For science, complete a Venn of bacterial and viral infections to compare those two and learn more about our current situation. The history and English links are unlimited. An image could be an interesting art challenge or graphic design challenge, and how you could change the layout of the page to include an image that represents our 2020 pandemic might be a nice addition. Thanks for watching. Please leave feedback or share if you think that Think Aloud on Pandemics is helpful, or if you have any suggestions for improvement. Take care, and please wash your hands. Thank you.